Now, I was chatting to a journalist from Fin24 a little earlier, and she told me that Stokvels now amount to about 45 billion rand in South Africa. Now, does that have any effect on our banks? Do you think that the banks are at all threatened by this?
I don't think that it's threatening to banks, because I think there is a lot of replication if you look at that statistic, because I believe that part of that 45 billion is already money sitting in banks, which is simply being withdrawn and entering the Stokvel environment. So a large portion of that money is probably banked and already in the financial services system. What you're getting, however, is that Stokvels engage a lot in micro lending, and a lot of people who do not qualify for micro or for bank loans are starting to utilize the Stokvel as a source of alternative loans. And I think that's where the middle class is starting to also take advantage, because of changes in regulations and the tighter monetary environment. It's hard to get a personal loan, and with a Stokvel, as long as you're known by the group. Remember, it's a social and a community thing, so they need to know who you are and have references on who you are. As long as you are known, have employment, you usually can borrow from a Stokvel. Challenges of borrowing from a Stokvel, however, is that Stokvels are much higher interest rates than banks, because they can set their own interest rate. So typically, Stokvels lend at between 25 and 50%. Average probably is 30% per month. And also the repayment terms are usually much tighter. You don't get 36 months in a Stokvel. Stokvels can only lend for a few months, so usually people pay back between 3 to 6 months the longest.
Now, banks have adjusted the way that they function in accommodating Stokvels. So, for instance, you can now access a group bank account if you are a member of a Stokvel. How exactly does that work? And who would be responsible for the documentation, say? Would every member of the 12-member Stokvel then have access to that bank account?
Okay, now typically banks do have a group society. They call them society bank accounts, sometimes Stokvel bank accounts, and essentially it's a group account where a Stokvel has to submit a constitution, and on the constitution they have to declare their name, they have to declare their purpose, as well as their office bearers. So essentially, you as a secretary, a chairperson, and perhaps a treasurer as well, and then they have to then nominate three signatories. Okay, and then the entire group needs to submit their FICA documentation, which is an ID document, as well as proof of address, and then they open this bank account. Typically, they'll receive one bank card or multiple bank cards, but only the signatories will have access to those funds. And usually, that's how typically it works. The challenge for most Stokvels is that Stokvels, by their nature, are informal. And the whole reason they functioned and worked well is because of the informality. So you find a greater majority of Stokvels is not so keen on going into the banking environment, either because they don't have documentation, you know, or they simply, don't want are not as literate, especially in the lower LSMs, to deal with those kind of financial products. So the challenge here is, do Stokvels want to be featured? A lot of them don't. A lot of them are social. Somebody comes in this month, and 2 months later they're out. And sometimes members are moving very fluidly, and so that is a challenge. But there are formal banking products to support Stokvels, such as society accounts, as well as the Stokvel banking accounts. But these are purely transactional accounts. They don't usually offer any significant interest. They're simply for transactional purposes and are used as a savings portal.
Right, because is it fair to say that being a part of a Stokvel is really to try and avoid interest rates, or to try and avoid having to pay off a loan?
I don't think so, because a bank loan is at a much lower interest rate than a Stokvel. However, for most people who have impaired credit, it is the only avenue. They have the option of going either to the loan shark or going to the Stokvel. And the Stokvel is a safer environment in that it's a community it's a community vehicle. So usually for you to even get a loan from the Stokvel, they need to know who you are, or you have to have a relationship connection with someone who's existing in the group. And I think for people who have impaired credit, it's now the only way of getting short-term finance for those people. But people who can qualify for a bank loan definitely run for the bank loan because it's at much lower interest rates and on much more favorable terms. But the money is usually available pretty quickly. So when you make a request for a loan through a Stockfell group, your money is available in a day or two. There's no vetting and checking because again, you have been vetted and checked by the member who knows you personally.